Hi. The last video I mentioned I'll be sort of exploring some of the more sort of folk roots of musical styles, and today I wanted to talk a little bit about the blues. Teaching in schools has been quite an interesting sort of, how can I put it, informative thing for me, because when classroom music covers things like various musical genres like the blues or reggae or whatever, it's obviously done in this sort of very watered down thing. And so what you get with the blues is this idea that there's only three chords, or that it's using a certain type of scale or a certain type of rhythm. And of course none of those things are strictly true, because there are lots of songs which are 12 bar, three chords, whatever, but that's by no means how blues operates. Blues could be one chord. It could be, it doesn't have to be that sort of swung rhythm, a shuffle rhythm. It could be something very different from that. And it's one of those things that's sort of like saying, well, I don't know what blues is, but I know when I hear it, type of thing. But the interesting thing is, of course, that blues was deeply rooted in the folk traditions of the people, as most musical styles are. Flamenco, Latin American music, folk music. And of course with that comes this sort of thing about how do people control and manipulate their environment, which takes us into a really interesting area which I haven't actually seen anybody really cover, to the point that I'm toying around with writing a book about this, because I think it's something that could be fascinating. And it started off really with me sort of, singing and playing blues. When you'd stumble across something that's like, well, be singing about mojos and, roots and all sorts of stuff. And you think, well, what's this? Well, what's all this about? And of course, what's going on is that there is a tradition of magic that runs through blues. Sort of hoodoo traditions. And of course, some of the early players were deeply involved in this. And of course, it actually reflects something about the music itself and where it's coming from. Now, I think probably our nearest connection now to magical thinking is psychology. And of course, we are now aware that people like Jung were deeply involved in magical thinking, but they just didn't let on. And of course, the Red Book came out about 100 years after his well, certainly 50 or 60 years after his death, and 100 years after his birth. No, that's not right. It was 100 years after he wrote it. So that sort of puts you into the sort of, into the frame of mind of this is where he was getting his information from. I don't want to scare the horses too much. So there's a sort of a mysticism thing going on with Jung, but deeply involved in the fact that reality could be affected by the sort of things that were going on in the unconscious, in a way that there was some sort of ritualistic behaviour. His ritualistic behaviour was to write his dreams down and to draw them. And when I say dreams, these are like guided journeys, which nowadays we would think more of it like a shamanic thing. So if you look at this stuff from from our psychological point of view, then you might find it easy to grasp. I don't mind approaching it from a magical perspective because I can see the validity of that from how things operate, particularly from music. So within the blues, there's a lot of references to certain magical herbs. One of them being the John I think there's two. There's John the Conqueror root, and there's the Low root. I think I'd have to. I haven't sort of researched this enough to be able. Just before I recorded this is completely off the top of my head. But these are the type of roots that would be put into conjuration bags, along with other artifacts, in order to affect some sort of magical charm. And it was their way of controlling or influencing things, because you've got to remember, lots of these people didn't have access to the law. The law was often being used on them, and we know of this in our country. The law took away common people's rights to land and all the rest of it, because that's how the law was. And to some extent, there is an element of that goes on now. We don't the game is quite clever because we never realise that it's being played on us. We all think that the law's there for our own good, but of course that's not actually been the way. If you're sort of somebody who lives on the peripheries of life, and a little while ago that would have been gays and all the rest of it. The law, it was illegal to be homosexual, so therefore, the law wasn't working on your behalf. But it's not until we look at things retrospectively that we realise that that's been a bit of an injustice. But of course, as you go back in time, there are lots of these injustices, and you start to realise that the law is a tool that's there to benefit the ones who probably are involved in the law or benefit from the law. They're the ones with the money who are protecting themselves. So when you get to musical traditions like the blues, and flamenco and things like that, they have no access to the law, so therefore they will use other means, and one of them of course is magic. Now, whether that makes events happen or gives you the wherewithal mentally to be able to deal with things or think differently, depending on whether you're thinking of it magically or whether you're thinking in a psychological perspective. I like to go back to the NLP maxim of it doesn't matter if it's real or not, does it work? And if you see a change happening in a way that benefits you, then it works. And I think that's the thing that we have to bear in mind. And of course, music would have been the vehicle to enchant those spells. I mentioned Dr. John in the last email because I can't remember Dr. John's real name now, but you can Google it. But of course, Dr. John wasn't his real name, and Dr. John was a hoodoo practitioner from New Orleans, a very famous one. So the musician Dr. John was drawing upon those the power of the name, which is quite typical in magical traditions, to affect some form of change and influence of people through his music. And of course, as musicians, you want to do that, because how many of you out there listening to this who are involved in music will back me up in saying that it's very difficult to get anybody to listen to your music or come and see you play. So there is something that happens that suddenly triggers the interest. You know, does it make you more charismatic? Could possibly do that. Certainly the old bluesmen thought that. So types of music to listen to, songs to listen to, songs by Muddy Waters. Obviously they're absolutely, totally infused with magical symbolism. I mentioned Dr. John. There are bands like Redbone, the First Peoples band, which obviously, because of the Guardians of the Galaxy, I think it is, some of their music became very popular again. But there's their song Witch Queen of New Orleans. Have a listen to all of that. Obviously Robert Johnson. Even the songs that come out of that musical tradition of the blues, like I Put a Spell on You, is a good example. And of course that's been doing the rounds with bands like Muse, as well as it being a song covered by Nina Simone. So have a listen to those, listen to how the lyrics work. They are very powerful songs. I'm not looking to prove anything here. I'm looking to open your mind to possibilities of things that may have been overlooked. So consider those, and next time we'll have a look at some of the magical folk traditions of Europe through music such as flamenco and some of the Italian folk traditions. As I say, these are there to whet your appetite and give you a sort of a deeper sort of perspective on possibilities. So for the next video, I'll see you then. Cheers, bye.